Why was everyone laughing that morning? The training field was usually a place of order, shouting commands, synchronized drills, boots stomping in rhythm. But that day, something felt off. The air was thick with restlessness. The sun burned down without mercy, turning the asphalt into a shimmer of heat waves and sweat. The soldiers had stripped their discipline down to sarcasm and impatience. A ball of mud flew across the yard, landing with a wet slap on a motor shed door. The laughter that followed was sharp and juvenile. No one noticed her yet, not the woman walking through the gate, posture straight, uniform immaculate, eyes steady. She moved differently from the others, calm, precise, like she carried something the rest of them had lost, a sense of quiet purpose. The guards barely gave her a glance. She looked too young, too composed to be anyone important. To them, she was just another officer, maybe a visitor from logistics. Private Collins leaned against a stack of crates, smirking. He was the kind of soldier who filled silence with noise, the kind who had learned that if you joked first, no one could see your fear. His shirt clung to him, soaked with sweat and pride. "Hey, new girl," he called out, his voice echoing off the walls. "You lost or just sightseeing?" The others snickered. She didn't answer, just kept walking, each step deliberate. The only sound was her boots pressing softly against the dirt. Collins grinned wider, mischief glinting in his eyes. He bent down, scooped up a handful of wet mud from the puddle beside his boot, and tossed it lightly between his palms. The laughter of the men fueled him. Guess command, letting anyone on base these days. He threw it. It hit her square on the cheek. For a heartbeat, the entire courtyard froze. The sound of impact, that wet, dull slap, cut through the noise like a gunshot. Time seemed to slow. A bead of mud slid down her face, across her collar, staining the white fabric that gleamed under the sun. And yet she didn't move. No flinch, no shout, no anger. Just silence. She reached up, wiped the mud slowly from her cheek, and let the handkerchief fall to the ground. Her eyes lifted, calm, cold, unreadable. The soldiers felt something shift in that instant, though they couldn't name it. A quiet authority filled the air, the kind that didn't come from shouting, but from something deeper. She spoke finally. Her voice was soft, dangerously soft. "Private, what's your name?" Collins straightened instinctively, his smirk faltering. "Collins, ma'am," he started, still trying to sound amused. "You should probably—" But she stepped closer, and the look in her eyes froze the rest of his words in his throat. From her breast pocket she pulled a folded paper, neat and crisp, the kind that only came from one place, Fleet Command. The wind caught its edge, revealing the bold signature at the bottom. Fleet Admiral Division. Commander Leia Hayes. The silver insignia on her collar caught the sunlight. A ripple went through the crowd. Murmurs spread like sparks in dry grass. "Admiral," someone whispered. "She's the new Admiral," another voice gasped. Collins felt his chest tighten. His pulse thundered in his ears. The laughter died. Even the birds above seemed to hush. She took one small step closer, and though her voice remained calm, every word carried the weight of thunder. "I asked for discipline, not entertainment," she said quietly. "I asked for respect, not ridicule, and yet here we are." Her eyes lingered on Collins for a long moment. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. Collins looked down. His hands shook. But then something no one expected happened. She didn't shout. She didn't call for guards or reprimands. Instead, she turned slightly, looking toward the patch of mud that had betrayed his temper. "Pick it up," she said. He blinked. "Ma'am." "The mud," she clarified, her tone level. "Pick it up." Confused, he knelt down, his fingers trembling as they touched the wet earth. "Feel it," she said softly. "That's the same ground soldiers have bled on, the same earth that soaked up the weight of those who never came back. You throw it, you disrespect them." The courtyard went dead silent again. Even the toughest sergeant swallowed hard. There was something in her words, not anger but sorrow, carried from somewhere far away. Collins looked down at his hand, staring at the mud. His throat tightened. "I didn't mean." "I know," she interrupted gently, "but meaning doesn't undo what's done. Only learning does." Then she turned and began walking toward headquarters. Her boots left faint imprints in the dirt, each step deliberate, graceful, unhurried. Soldiers straightened as she passed, eyes following her, not because they were told to, but because something in them couldn't look away. She disappeared into the main building, leaving behind silence and a new kind of order. That evening, as the flag was lowered, Collins stayed behind, alone. The rest of the platoon had gone to the mess hall, but he knelt on the same training field he had mocked her in, cleaning the mud-streaked ground. His reflection wavered in the shallow puddles, distorted, small. When she walked past again, she didn't stop. She only gave a small nod, not of authority but acknowledgement. Forgiveness, quiet and wordless. He saluted, his hand trembling, not out of fear but respect. Because that day, something shifted in him, in all of them. They had seen power before, orders barked, punishments dealt, egos flaring, but this was different. This was leadership, the kind that taught without humiliating, the kind that didn't need to scream to be heard. In the barracks that night, the men whispered her name in low voices. "Admiral Hayes," one said quietly. "You think she's from intelligence?" another asked. "No," someone replied. "She's from somewhere harder." No one laughed that night. No one dared. In her quarters, Admiral Hayes stood before the mirror, wiping away the faint smudge left on her collar. Her reflection stared back, calm but tired. Behind her eyes, something heavy lived. She reached into her drawer, pulling out a folded photograph. 4 faces smiled up at her, her old squad, taken years ago overseas. Mud-covered, exhausted but alive. All except one. Her hand brushed over the faded image of a man at the edge of the frame. Captain Erik Danner. She swallowed, the same mud, the same earth. That's what she had meant. Her voice softened as she whispered to the empty room. "You'd laugh if you saw me now, Erik. Me, an admiral." A faint smile touched her lips, fragile and fleeting. Then she folded the photo back, tucked it away, and stared at the insignia gleaming on her uniform. Power was a strange thing. It could command fear or inspire grace. The choice was always in the hands that held it. Outside, the base settled into quiet. Crickets chirped. Somewhere, a guard called the midnight hour. But in the command office, Admiral Hayes remained awake, reviewing reports, watching, learning. She didn't want to be the kind of leader who punished to prove control. She wanted to be the kind who could rebuild the broken without breaking anyone else in the process. And yet, as she sat there, her thoughts drifted to a single question that refused to leave her mind. Was forgiveness strength or weakness? She wasn't sure anymore. Because somewhere inside, beneath the calm surface, she still remembered the sting of that mud, not the pain, but the reminder that respect is fragile, easily lost, rarely earned. When morning came, the base would be different. Orders would shift, routines would tighten, and the soldiers who once laughed would stand straighter when she passed. But for now, alone in that quiet room, she allowed herself one final thought, a whisper meant only for herself. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak," she murmured. "It simply acts." The light above her flickered, catching the glint of the silver star on her collar. Outside, the horizon began to pale with the first hint of dawn. Tomorrow, they would all remember the mud. But she would remember the lesson beneath it. Why did the base feel colder that morning, even under the same merciless sun? Maybe it wasn't the weather. Maybe it was the silence, that strange, watchful quiet that follows a storm no one saw coming. The soldiers avoided laughter now. Their voices dropped when they spoke her name. Admiral Leia Hayes, the woman who turned a punishment into a lesson, the woman who never raised her voice but somehow made everyone listen. She walked across the compound with that same calm presence, hands clasped behind her back, eyes scanning everything and nothing at once. Discipline had returned, yes, but something else had arrived too: tension. The kind that lived in glances, in unfinished sentences. Respect mixed with unease. In the briefing room, a group of officers stood around the table, papers scattered, the morning coffee still steaming. Major Keene, the senior operations officer, was mid-sentence when she entered. His tone, casual, confident, the kind that came from years of unchecked authority. "And if command thinks we're running drills in this heat again, they can take it up with logistics," he muttered. The door opened quietly. She stepped in. "Take it up with me, Major," she said, her voice even. The room froze. Keene's jaw tightened, but he saluted. "Ma'am," he said. Leia returned the gesture. "Please, continue your briefing. I'd like to understand what I'm inheriting." The officers exchanged glances. One of them shuffled the map on the table, pretending to be busy. Keene cleared his throat and gestured toward the board. "Training schedules are behind by 2 weeks. Maintenance reports are incomplete. Morale could use improvement," he said flatly. Her gaze drifted across the map, dotted lines, deployment markers, rotation charts, but her attention wasn't on the paper. It was on the men in the room. The ones who avoided her eyes. The ones who didn't stand tall when she walked in. "How long have you been running this base, Major?" she asked. 18 months, ma'am." "And in that time," she said, "how often did your men lose focus during drills?" Keene hesitated. "It's been an ongoing challenge." "Because—" he exhaled, trying not to sound defensive. "Because they're tired. We all are. It's routine day in and day out. This isn't the front line, it's maintenance, supply chain, training. They get restless." Leia nodded slowly. "Restless," she repeated. "That's one word for it. Another might be undisciplined." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "With respect, Admiral, this isn't Fleet Command. These are soldiers, not Academy cadets. You can't expect textbook discipline here." She looked up sharply. "No," she said, "I expect better." The words hung in the air like the edge of a blade. Keene said nothing. The others shifted uncomfortably. Leia leaned forward slightly, her tone soft but cutting. "If routine dulls their purpose, Major, it's not the soldiers who have failed. It's the leaders who have stopped reminding them why they're here." He opened his mouth to respond, but her gaze silenced him. After a moment, she turned to the others. "I'll be reviewing each department personally. No filters, no formalities. I want to see the truth of this base, not the version you write on reports. Dismissed." As they filed out, Keene lingered, his voice lowered. "Ma'am, off the record, I've seen officers like you before, fresh from command, full of ideals, but this place, it breaks ideals. Be careful not to lose yours trying to fix us." She looked at him, unreadable. "Or maybe," she said quietly, "you're afraid I'll remind you you've already lost yours." He didn't reply, just turned and left. The door closed, silence. Leia exhaled slowly. Her reflection in the window stared back, the insignia shining, the uniform crisp. And yet, behind it all, she still saw the woman she once was, before the rank, before the medals, before the walls she built to keep the ghosts at bay. Outside, a soft wind stirred the flags. That night she walked the perimeter alone. The guards saluted as she passed, puzzled that an admiral would walk without escort. She preferred it that way. Out here, under the open sky, the stars felt closer, reminders of the ones who never made it home. She reached the far edge of the training yard, where the mud from yesterday had dried into cracked earth. Her boot pressed against it, and she paused. For a moment, she imagined the laughter again, the slap of wet dirt, the silence after. It wasn't the mud that had stung. It was the memory it had pulled from the shadows. Years ago, another field, another heat, another face, Erik Danner's, half smiling through a helmet visor. "You can't teach respect, Leia," he'd said. "You can only show it until they mirror it back." She had believed him. until the day his unit never returned from recon. Her radio had gone dead mid-signal. His last words, "Tell them to stay low." And then silence. Now standing on the cracked earth, she whispered to the wind, "You'd have handled it differently, wouldn't you, Erik?" But the night didn't answer. The following morning, the base came alive with tension again, not the chaotic kind, but the uncertain kind. Orders were different, schedules reshuffled, drills intensified. The cafeteria ran on time for the first time in months. Even Collins, who once mocked her, moved with silent precision. He caught her eye once across the yard. She nodded slightly. He returned the gesture, a small, wordless truce. But not everyone shared it. Inside the officers' quarters, Major Keene sat with two others, Captain Ross and Lieutenant Vickers. His tone hushed but hard. "She's rearranging everything," Keene said, his voice edged with disbelief. "Cutting through my chain like it's paper, even took my platoon schedule for review." Ross frowned. "You think command sent her to audit us?" "No," Keene said darkly. "They sent her to replace us." A pause, then Vickers, the youngest, spoke quietly. "She doesn't lead like the others, sir. The men actually listen to her." Keene scoffed. "They fear her, Vickers. Don't confuse silence for loyalty." But even he didn't sound convinced. Meanwhile, in her office, Leia sat reviewing a casualty report from 2 years earlier, the one she couldn't forget. Operation Nightville, the mission that changed everything, the mission that took Erik. The pages were yellowed from time, the ink faded, but the words still cut like shrapnel. Enemy ambush, unit compromised, casualties 7 confirmed, 1 missing. Missing. That was the word she had hated most. Because missing meant hope, and hope was cruel. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said. It was Collins. He stood in the doorway, posture stiff, unsure. "Permission to speak, ma'am." She gestured for him to enter. "I just wanted to apologize, properly, for what happened," he said. "It was stupid, I was stupid." Her gaze softened slightly. "You've already shown me your apology, Private." He looked confused. "You've been early to every drill since," she added. "You've led your unit without complaint. Actions speak louder than words, Collins. Remember that." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am, thank you." As he turned to leave, she added quietly, "Do you know why I didn't punish you that day?" He hesitated. "Because you're kind." She almost smiled, but it wasn't kindness in her eyes. It was something heavier. "No, because punishment teaches fear. I wanted you to remember, fear fades. Lessons don't." He nodded again, slower this time, then left. When the door closed, Leia leaned back in her chair, eyes lifting to the small photo on her desk, the same one from the drawer. Erik, smiling through mud. She whispered, "They're learning, Erik. Maybe not fast, but they're learning." Outside, storm clouds began to gather on the horizon. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and something else, change. The base would face more than just training reforms. Something was coming. Orders were due from Fleet Command soon. She could feel it in the way the communication channels had gone quiet. Silence in the military world never meant peace. She stood by the window as thunder rolled across the sky. Her reflection merged with the storm clouds outside, her insignia catching brief flashes of lightning. And somewhere deep down, she felt that old, familiar unease, the one that whispered of missions half buried and enemies never truly gone. Tomorrow, she would find out what Command wanted from her. And it wouldn't be paperwork. Why was Command calling her to the comms room at midnight? The storm outside hadn't stopped since sunset. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder grumbled over the hills, and lightning flashed across the soaked training field where only hours ago soldiers had been drilling under her orders. Now, the base was quiet, except for the static whisper of the radio channel that wouldn't go silent. Admiral Leia Hayes walked into the communication hub, the light above flickering like an exhausted pulse. The duty officer saluted, nervous. "Transmission from Fleet Command, ma'am. Encrypted clearance, priority 1. She nodded, took the headset, and keyed in her access code. "Admiral Hayes receiving." A voice crackled through, distant but sharp. "Admiral Rourke, her superior." "Leia," he said without formality, "we have an operation, classified. You're being reassigned effective immediately." Her pulse slowed. She known it was coming. Command didn't summon admirals for casual updates at midnight. "Understood. What's the target?" There was a pause, longer than usual. Then Rourke said, "Operation Iron Veil, Sector 7 Delta. You'll lead a small team, no broadcast, no support." She frowned. "That's an old sector, sir, off-grid since the Nightville collapse." "I know." Her heart skipped. The name, Nightville, the mission that took Erik Danner, the mission she'd buried deep under paperwork and silence. "Sir," she said carefully, "what's there to return to?" "Intelligence recovered new data," Rourke replied. "An unmarked signal, possibly an old distress beacon. Coordinates match the Nightville crash zone." For a moment, the rain outside sounded louder. "Sir, are you saying?" "I'm saying someone or something is transmitting from that valley again." Silence filled the room. Her hand tightened on the mic. "Could it be one of ours?" she asked quietly. Rourke didn't answer immediately. "You'll find out soon enough. Depart 600. File no report until return. You'll brief no one outside your team. Understood?" She nodded slowly, though he couldn't see her. "Understood." The line went dead. She stood there for a long time after, headset dangling, heart hammering. The rain's rhythm against the roof became almost unbearable. Nightville. After all these years, Command had reopened the scar she'd built her career on hiding. When dawn came, the sky was pale and bruised. The base stirred to life under gray light. Leia walked toward the hangar, the damp air cold against her skin. Her uniform was immaculate as always, but her thoughts weren't. Major Keene was waiting for her at the vehicle line. "Ma'am, I heard you're heading out," he said, tone careful. She nodded. "Training operations will continue under your watch. No deviations. You'll report daily status to command." He hesitated. This wouldn't happen to be related to that midnight call, would it? She gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You hear too much, Major." He exhaled. "You don't have to go yourself, you know. Admiral's delegate, that's the privilege of rank." "Rank doesn't erase responsibility," she said quietly. "It deepens it." He frowned, studying her. "You're chasing something out there, aren't you?" Her expression didn't change. "Maybe I'm just answering it." Then she walked away. Inside the hangar, 3 soldiers stood ready beside a transport jeep, hand-picked, young, eager. Sergeant Mason, Tech Specialist Rivera, and Medic Tran, all briefed for a recon retrieval. None knew what they were really walking into. Mason saluted. "Ma'am, all supplies loaded. Estimated arrival by 1300 if weather clears." "Good," she said. "No chatter, no assumptions. We move as one." As they drove out, the storm began to fade behind them. The road wound through misty ridges, the landscape scarred by years of abandoned training zones and forgotten wars. The silence inside the vehicle was thick, broken only by the hum of the engine and the rattle of rain on the roof. Rivera, the youngest, finally spoke. "Permission to ask something, Admiral." "Go ahead." "Why us? Why such a small team?" Leia's gaze stayed on the road ahead. "Because sometimes too many voices drown out the truth." Mason glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "And what truth are we looking for, ma'am?" She didn't answer. By noon, they reached the valley, a hollow stretch of broken trees and mud that seemed frozen in time. The sky was low, the wind carrying the metallic scent of rust and memory. "This place feels wrong," Tran muttered. Leia stepped out, scanning the terrain. The GPS pinged faintly. "Signals close, 200 meters northwest." They followed her through the brush, boots sinking into damp soil. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, no birds, no wind, just the sound of their breathing. Then Rivera stopped. "Ma'am, there." Half buried beneath twisted branches was a blackened transmitter, old military grade, marked with fleet insignia half scratched away. She knelt beside it, brushing away dirt. The screen flickered faintly, static blinking across its surface. Mason crouched beside her. "That's impossible. This unit been inactive for years." Leia's throat tightened. Her fingers hovered over the faint engraving on the side, barely visible under grime. "Unit 4N9 CMD, Danner." Her breath caught. She turned away quickly, voice low. "Rivera, can you patch the frequency? I want to know what it's been broadcasting." He knelt, tools clicking, rain dripping off his helmet. "Trying, ma'am. The signal's corrupted, but there's a short repeating message." He paused. "Its voice encrypted, ma'am, human origin." Leia's heartbeat stumbled. "Play it." Static, then a faint broken voice. "Hayes, if anyone mission compromised, repeat, do not trust." The transmission cut. Her world stopped. The others looked at her, startled. Mason said, "That voice, that was." "Yes," she whispered, "Erik Danner." Rivera frowned. "But that can't be. Nightville was over 2 years ago." She stood, staring into the fog-shrouded valley. "Apparently not for everyone." They secured the recorder, loaded samples, and began setting up a temporary perimeter. But Leia wasn't hearing their chatter anymore. Her mind was back there 2 years earlier, the day everything went wrong. Rain, radio static. Her voice breaking through the comms. "Erik, report status." And his final words, "Tell them to stay low." Then silence. Now that same silence was talking back to her. That night they camped near the ridge. The fire flickered weakly against the damp wind. Rivera worked on the signal logs, Mason kept watch, and Tran cleaned his med kit out of habit more than need. Leia sat apart, eyes fixed on the recorder, the small device lying in her palm like a ghost she wasn't ready to touch. Mason finally spoke. "Ma'am, if that was really him, what do we do now?" She didn't look up. "We follow the transmission. If it's a loop, we'll confirm it. If it's live," she paused, her voice barely above a whisper, "we bring him home." "But Admiral," Rivera started. "Not a word of this leaves the team," she said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "Fleet Command will bury this faster than they did Nightville." The fire cracked. The valley wind carried faint echoes that almost sounded like voices, or maybe memory. Hours passed, the rain stopped, the night settled into heavy silence. Then a faint ping from Rivera's console. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "there's movement, east quadrant, low thermal signature, human-sized." Mason grabbed his rifle. "Could be scavengers." "Or survivors," she said. She stood, eyes sharp. "Gear up, no lights." They moved through the dark, slow, methodical, careful. The forest floor crunched faintly under their boots. Somewhere ahead, something shifted. A silhouette moved between the trees, human, limping. Mason whispered, "Ma'am, permission to approach." Leia raised a hand, stopping him. "Wait." The figure stumbled closer, into the faint moonlight breaking through the branches. He was thin, uniform torn, face obscured by mud and grime. He looked up, eyes wide, hollow. Then he whispered her name. "Leia." Her heart stopped. The voice, rough, broken, but real. "Erik," she breathed. He fell to his knees. The others froze, eyes wide. Rivera muttered, this can't be happening." Leia dropped beside him, hands trembling as she touched his shoulder. His skin was cold but alive. "Erik, it's me," she said, voice cracking. "It's Leia." He looked at her, recognition flickering through exhaustion. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. "They'll find you." "Who?" she demanded softly. But before he could answer, a flare burst overhead, blinding light flooding the valley. Mason shouted, "Incoming!" Gunfire erupted from the ridge. She threw herself down, pulling Erik behind the nearest rock. Bullets tore through the mud. Rivera returned fire, shouting coordinates. Leia's voice was steady despite the chaos. Defensive positions. No one breaks line. The valley, silent for years, was alive again, with fire, smoke, and echoes of a war she thought was over. And in the middle of it, Leia Hayes realized something that turned her blood cold. This wasn't just an ambush. Someone knew she was coming. Why did the gunfire sound so familiar? It wasn't the first time Admiral Leia Hayes had heard it, that dry, echoing rhythm of chaos cutting through the night. But this time it was different. This time the bullets weren't aimed at a nameless enemy. They were meant for her. The first shot hit the tree beside her, bark exploding across her cheek. Mason yelled something she couldn't hear over the noise. Rivera hit the dirt, returning fire toward the ridge. Tran dragged the wounded man, Erik Danner, behind a half-toppled log, shouting for cover. "Flank east," Leia ordered, her voice calm, sharp. "Keep them in sight, but don't engage blind." They moved in practiced rhythm, but she could tell this wasn't a random ambush. These shooters knew terrain, elevation, and line of sight. Whoever they weren't scavengers. They were trained. Erik's breathing was ragged, each inhale a struggle. His uniform was tattered, soaked in mud and blood. "Leia," he gasped, "you shouldn't be here." She crouched beside him, pressing down on his shoulder wound. "You think I could just ignore a transmission with your voice on it?" He tried to speak but coughed hard, blood staining his lips. "They'll kill you too." "Not today," she said firmly. "Not before I find out what the hell happened." A burst of gunfire cracked from the ridge again. Mason returned fire, shouting, "Two hostiles down, could be more circling." "Copy," Leia said. "We're pulling back to the secondary slope." Rivera called out, "Ma'am, we're pinned." She looked at the valley, too open, no cover beyond 30 meters. A kill zone. She knew this tactic, she used it once herself. She clenched her jaw. "Smoke grenades left arc on my mark." "Ready," Mason shouted. "Now." They threw. White clouds burst across the valley, swallowing the gunfire in mist. Leia grabbed Erik's arm, slinging it over her shoulder. "Move." They ran, half carrying, half dragging him through the mud. The smoke mixed with the cold rain, turning the world into a ghostly blur of shadows and echoes. By the time they reached the tree line, the gunfire had stopped. Only silence remained, heavy, waiting. They ducked behind a cluster of rocks. Leia pressed her back against the cold stone, breathing hard. Mason crouched beside her, eyes scanning through the scope. "They're gone, ma'am. No movement." "No," she said quietly. "They're not gone, they're repositioning." Tran was kneeling beside Erik, trying to stabilize him. "He's lost a lot of blood. We need evac now." "There's no evac," Leia said. "Command doesn't even know we're here." Mason frowned. Then who do these guys belong to? That question lingered in the cold air like smoke. Leia looked at Erik, his face pale, his eyes half open. "He does," she said softly. "Erik," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Talk to me. Who's after us?" He looked up at her, pain and exhaustion flickering behind his gaze. "They're not enemies," he said weakly. "They're ours." She froze. "What did you say?" He coughed again, voice shaking. "Fleet Division, Black Section, Off-Books Unit. After Nightville, they wanted it buried." "Buried?" Leia repeated. He nodded faintly. "We found something we weren't supposed to. Command ordered a silence op. They hit us before the extraction." Leia felt the air leave her lungs. "You're telling me Nightville wasn't an ambush, it was an execution?" Erik's silence was enough answer. Rivera whispered, horrified, "Our own people shot you down." Leia's gaze hardened. "Not people, orders." She stood, gripping her rifle, scanning the shadows. Somewhere out there, someone was still hunting them, still following the same protocol from years ago. No survivors. The rain began again, softer this time, like the earth itself was holding its breath. "Ma'am," Mason said quietly, "if command sent them, we can't go back." "I know," she said. "That's why we'll go forward." She looked toward the deeper part of the valley, the old wreckage zone of the Nightville drop. If there were answers, they'd be there. They moved slowly through the forest, guiding Erik on a makeshift stretcher. The smell of old metal and damp earth grew stronger with every step. After an hour they reached it, the remains of a downed transport buried half in mud, half in memory. Rusted panels, shattered glass, torn insignia. The skeleton of a secret no one was supposed to find again. "This was your bird?" Mason asked. Erik nodded weakly. "Nightville 4. Leia walked closer, her hand brushing against the charred metal. For a moment, she could almost hear their voices again, her old team laughing through static, Erik's calm instructions, the chaos that followed. Then she saw it faint etching near the tail. Unit 9A, Black Section Property. Her jaw tightened. "He's telling the truth," she said. "They marked their own." Rivera crouched beside a half-buried crate. "Ma'am, there's still a data core intact here. It's military grade." "Get it open," she said. As Rivera worked, Erik stirred. His voice came weakly. "Leia, if you see what's inside, you'll understand why they killed us." She glanced at him, her eyes softening. "I don't need understanding. I need the truth." The crate clicked open. Inside, a small black drive sealed in carbon casing. The tag read, "Project Iron Veil Clearance Omega." Leia's stomach twisted. "Iron Veil," she whispered. That was the name Rourke had used last night. "Ma'am," Mason asked. She picked up the drive, rain dripping off its surface. "We're bringing this back." Erik's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist weakly. "Don't, they'll track it. You can't take it to them." "Then where?" she asked. He coughed hard, every breath costing him strength. "North Ridge, old relay bunker, it's shielded. They can't intercept there. That's where I was headed before." His words trailed off. Tran checked his pulse. "He's stable for now." Leia nodded. "Then we finish what you started." They began moving again northward through dense forest. The rain grew heavier, the path steeper. The mud clung to their boots, that same earth she'd once used as a lesson. Now it was her test. Hours passed. The cold set in. They moved in silence until Rivera whispered, "Movement, behind us." Mason turned, scanning. Thermal signatures, 3 No 4, same unit size as before. Leia's mind raced. They were being tracked not by guesswork but by signal, the drive. "Rivera," she said sharply, "dump your pack. They tagged it." He froze, startled. "Ma'am, it's—" "Now." He ripped the pack off, tossing it into the ravine. A second later, an explosion lit the forest below, sharp, contained, deliberate. A tracer detonation. Mason cursed. "They're not trying to capture, they're trying to erase." "Then we keep moving," Leia said. "They can't kill what they can't find." By the time they reached the bunker, night had fallen again. The structure was old, overgrown, its metal door rusted but intact. Mason pried it open with a crowbar and they slipped inside. The interior smelled of dust and iron. Old generators lined the walls, and the faint hum of dormant power echoed through the concrete. Rivera connected the drive to an old terminal. Static flickered on the cracked screen. "It's encrypted, ma'am, deep." Leia stepped closer. "Can you break it?" He hesitated. "Maybe, if I cross-link it with the base mainframe back home." She stared at him. "You mean the same mainframe command controls?" He looked down. "Yes, ma'am." "Then no," she said sharply. "We do it offline." Erik stirred again, his voice faint. "The code 94 Delta Sierra, that's the bypass." Rivera entered it. The screen blinked and then words appeared, one line at a time. "Project Iron Veil, authorized objective. Simulation deployment testing. Human subjects 14. Result, COMPROMISED. Termination order issued. Classified by Fleet Command, ROARKE. Leia's blood ran cold. She read the name again, Rourke. Her superior, the man who'd sent her here. Mason's voice was barely a whisper. "Ma'am, they executed their own men to cover a test." Leia's jaw tightened. "No, they executed them to erase evidence." Erik's hand trembled as he pointed weakly at the screen. "We were never supposed to survive. They called it a simulation, but it was live combat. They fed us false coordinates, watched from orbit." Her heart sank. "You mean they used you as bait?" He nodded faintly. "And when we found out, they silenced the operation, all of it." Silence filled the bunker. Only the faint buzz of the terminal remained. Then Mason spoke. "Ma'am, what do we do now?" Leia looked at the screen one last time, then shut it off. "We do what they don't expect." She turned to Rivera. "Download everything, every file, every timestamp." "Yes, ma'am." "And then," she said, her voice calm but steeled with resolve, "we make it public." Rivera blinked. "Public, that's treason." "No," she said quietly, "that's justice." Erik smiled weakly. "You haven't changed." She glanced down at him, eyes softening. "You have." He chuckled faintly, then grimaced in pain. "Leia, if you make it out, tell them we didn't die for nothing." Her throat tightened. "You'll tell them yourself." But even as she said it, she could see in his eyes he didn't believe that. Outside, thunder rolled again. Leia looked toward the door. "They'll come at dawn," she said. "They'll burn this place to ash, but not before we send this out." She placed her hand on the terminal, steady and unshaking. Because she knew something now, something command never understood. They could bury truth under mud, under blood, under silence. But they couldn't kill the people who carried it. Not forever. Why did dawn always come right before destruction? The first pale light bled through the cracks in the bunker door, soft and cold, the kind that didn't bring warmth, only revelation. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the silence that sits before something terrible. Inside, the bunker hummed with low, dying power. The generator's pulse matched her heartbeat, unsteady, fatting. Admiral Leia Hayes stood near the terminal, eyes fixed on the screen. Data streamed across in lines of code, the truth finally bleeding out of its cage. Rivera typed furiously, hands shaking. "Ma'am, the transfer's halfway through. Encryption layers are heavy. Someone's trying to counterlock it remotely." Leia's eyes narrowed. "They know we're transmitting." "Then they know where we are," Mason said from the doorway, rifle ready. "Motion sensors picking up movement, north and east flanks, could be drones." Leia stepped closer, looking over his shoulder. Through the cracked concrete, faint glints of metal flickered between the trees. They were coming. "Time?" she asked. "Maybe 10 minutes before they breach," he replied. She nodded slowly. "That's enough." Behind her, Erik stirred weakly on the cot, his breathing shallow. "Leia," his voice was barely more than a whisper. She turned, moving to him quickly. "You need to rest." He shook his head. "You don't have time for that." His eyes, faded but still the same blue she remembered, locked on hers. "You're doing what I couldn't. Don't stop now." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You shouldn't have had to die to prove a point." He gave a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "In war, truth is always a casualty first." Her chest tightened. She hated how calm he sounded, like a man who had already made peace with something she hadn't. Rivera called out, "Ma'am, I've got signal relay on backup. I can piggyback off an old satellite band. It'll hit the public relay network before Fleet Command can jam it." "Do it," she said. "But Admiral—" "No hesitation, Sergeant. We didn't come this far to hide again." He nodded and kept typing. The room filled with the clatter of keys and the hum of the dying generator. Mason adjusted his scope, watching the tree line. Movement confirmed. Multiple heat signatures. They're spreading, classic encirclement. Leia walked to him. We hold them as long as we can. If they break through, we fall back to the south exit. Ma'am, you don't understand, Mason said, his voice tight. This isn't a squad, it's a strike unit. Full suppression gear. They're not coming to arrest us. Leia met his gaze, calm and unwavering. I know. There was no panic in her, only that same quiet steadiness, the kind that had silenced an entire courtyard weeks ago when mud hit her face. But this time, it wasn't humiliation she stood against. It was annihilation. The first explosion shook the bunker. Dust rained from the ceiling. Rivera shouted, signal at 82%, almost there. Keep going, Leia said. Mason, defensive positions. Mason and Tran took cover by the door. Gunfire erupted outside, sharp, precise, disciplined. Erik tried to sit up, grimacing. Leia, listen to me. Rourke's not working alone. Iron Veil wasn't just a test, it was a purge. He used us to erase a mistake Command made years ago. She leaned closer, gripping his hand. What mistake? He swallowed hard, voice shaking. They were developing human synchronization protocols, linking soldiers to AI-driven combat systems. It failed. People lost control. Entire units wiped out. They buried it under the name Project Iron Veil. Her pulse spiked, and Nightville was the cleanup. They sent us in to retrieve the last prototype. But when we realized it was never the enemy who shot at us, it was our own automated systems gone rogue, his breath faltered. Rourke ordered the blackout. He couldn't risk exposure. Leia's blood ran cold. You mean? Yes, he rasped. We didn't die in war, we died in silence. Another explosion rocked the bunker. The lights flickered. Rivera yelled over the noise, transmission at 93%, almost complete. Keep it alive, Leia shouted. Mason fired again, his jaw clenched. They're close, Admiral, too close. Then make every bullet count, she said. The sound of metal boots echoed outside. Voices shouted commands not in enemy dialects but in clean, clipped fleet formation code. Her own people, her own uniform. Leia's throat tightened. For a second the rage threatened to break her calm, but she held it because anger was noise and noise got people killed. Ma'am, Rivera called. They've locked onto our position. I can reroute the signal through an emergency beacon. It'll auto-transmit even if we go dark. Do it. Done, but we'll lose manual control once I send it. Then send it, she said. Let the world hear what they tried to hide. He hit enter. The screen flashed, transmission deployed. At that same moment, the bunker door exploded inward. The blast threw Mason back, knocking his rifle across the floor. Smoke and dust filled the air as silhouettes poured through, soldiers in black tactical armor, visors glowing faint red. Down, Leia shouted. Gunfire erupted. The room turned into chaos, muzzle flashes lighting faces, concrete shards slicing through smoke. Leia fired, precise and unshaking. 1, 2, 3. Each shot a controlled breath, not rage, not fear. Rivera screamed, they're breaching the east wall. Tran ducked, pulling him behind cover. Mason dragged a wounded soldier down before returning fire. Leia moved toward the cot where Erik still lay. She grabbed his arm. We're leaving. He shook his head weakly. No, you go, you still have a chance. Not without you. Leia, he said softly, his voice breaking. Don't waste it this time. You always save everyone but yourself. The words hit her harder than any bullet. Before she could answer, another explosion tore through the side wall. The shockwave threw her to the ground. Her ears rang, her vision blurred. When the dust cleared, Mason was shouting orders. Rivera was bleeding from his shoulder, and Erik was gone from the cot. Her heart dropped. Erik. Through the haze, she saw him, dragging himself toward the console, blood trailing behind him. He reached the terminal, pulled a pin from his vest. "Erik, no," she shouted. He looked back at her, eyes calm. "You told me once dignity doesn't speak, it acts." He smiled faintly, then pressed the trigger. The explosion swallowed the far end of the bunker, collapsing the entry corridor. The blast wave knocked everyone down, the room filled with choking smoke and debris. When she came to, the gunfire had stopped. Only the sound of distant static filled the air. The console was gone, melted metal and fire. Erik was gone too. Rivera coughed, struggling to sit up. "Ma'am," he sealed the entrance. Leia stared at the wreckage. "He gave us time." Mason limped toward her. "We can't hold this position anymore. There's a south tunnel, maybe a kilometer out." She nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the burning console. "We move now." They gathered what little remained: weapons, medical kit, the charred remains of the drive casing. As they stepped through the cracked tunnel, Leia looked back one last time. The bunker that had held their truth now burned in silence. Smoke curled upward, carrying the last of Erik's sacrifice with it. Outside, dawn finally broke through the clouds, golden light spilling across the valley like a cruel mercy. They emerged onto a ridge overlooking the forest. Behind them, black plumes rose where the bunker once stood. Ahead, the world stretched endless, mountains, clouds, and somewhere beyond them, the truth now traveling across the airwaves. Rivera stopped, wiping blood from his brow. "Ma'am, if that transmission reached command, they'll hunt us to the end of the earth." Leia's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "Good, then they'll finally stop hiding." Mason exhaled, weary but resolute. "What now?" She looked at both of them, the survivors who hadn't asked for any of this, who had followed her anyway. "Now we make sure his story doesn't die in a classified file." They started walking, slow, steady steps through the mud, every footprint a reminder of those who never left it. Behind them, the smoke rose higher, twisting into the morning sky like a silent salute. Leia paused for a moment, eyes glistening. Her voice, barely a whisper, carried through the wind. "You were right, Erik. Some things can't be buried, not under silence, not under lies, not even under war." Mason looked at her. "You think the world will believe us?" She gave a small, tired smile. "Truth doesn't need belief, it just needs daylight." They walked on. The sun crept higher, its light breaking across their worn faces, across the mud still clinging to her boots, the same earth she once made a soldier hold to teach him respect. Now it was teaching her something else. That leadership wasn't about commanding men or winning battles. It was about standing still in the storm and choosing the harder road, the one that cost you everything, but left the world a little more honest. The wind carried her final words, soft, firm, almost prayer-like. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And for the first time in years, Admiral Leia Hayes felt something she hadn't felt since before the mud, before the rank, before the loss. Peace. Why was silence more dangerous than gunfire? Leia Hayes had known the sound of bullets, the roar of engines, the chaos of command, but the silence that followed the broadcast was far worse. It was the kind of silence that meant people were watching, waiting, deciding which side of truth they stood on. 3 days had passed since the bunker burned. 3 days since Erik Danner's final act of defiance turned into a signal that lit up half the world before command could shut it down. The official channels called it unauthorized data corruption. But whispers spread faster than denials. Soldiers talked in mess halls, in barracks, on convoy routes. They spoke about Nightville, about Iron Veil, about the Admiral who went missing after exposing it all. Leia Hayes now, technically a traitor. The rain had returned that morning. The small cabin deep in the forest dripped with water from every beam and crack. Mason stood by the window, scanning the tree line through binoculars. Rivera sat near the dying fire, shoulder still bandaged, trying to tune a portable radio. "Nothing but static," Rivera muttered. "Command blacked out the public bands." "They're not just blacking them out," Mason said. They're scrubbing every mention of you, ma'am. I checked the feeds last night, no record, no profile, not even an assignment listing. It's like Admiral Leia Hayes never existed. Leia didn't look up. She was sitting on the floor, dismantling and cleaning her sidearm with slow, deliberate motions. Her uniform jacket hung nearby, stripped of insignia, just gray fabric now. No rank, no name. They're trying to erase me, she said softly. That's their first move. Make me a ghost so when they kill me, no one remembers. Mason turned, lowering the binoculars. We should move. There's a town 50 clicks east, low population, off-grid. We can regroup there. She shook her head. Too predictable. They'll anticipate every direction that leads away from command territory. We need to move toward them. Rivera looked up, startled. Toward them. Her eyes lifted, calm, certain. If they're hunting me, I want them to find me on my terms. Mason frowned. That's suicide. No, she said, reassembling her weapon. It's control. The fire crackled faintly. Outside, thunder rolled again. She stood and moved to the window, watching rain blur the forest. Command will deploy an investigative tribunal soon. They'll call it an inquiry into data security breaches. They'll make Rourke the lead investigator. The man who ordered Night Vale. The man who buried Iron Veil. Rivera's jaw tightened. He'll spin it, make you the scapegoat. He'll try, she said, but he won't expect me to walk into his courtroom alive. Mason stared at her. Ma'am, what exactly are you planning? She turned toward him, her voice low but steady. To remind them that silence has consequences. They left the cabin before dawn, moving through the forest like ghosts. The mist clung low to the ground and their footsteps vanished into the wet earth. Leia led the way, her movements precise, her awareness sharp. Every sound mattered. Every silence did too. Hours later, they reached the edge of an old supply road, cracked asphalt overtaken by weeds. A signpost leaned at an angle, rusted letters spelling, Sector 9 Transit, Restricted Access. Mason crouched. This leads straight to the airstrip outside Delta Base. You think they'll let us just stroll through? They won't see us, she said. Not until I want them to. They followed the road until the outline of hangars came into view, abandoned, but guarded now. Drones hovered like silent wasps in the morning fog. Rivera crouched beside her. Ma'am, that's fleet perimeter surveillance. We go near that, we're dead. Not if we make them think we're already captured, she said, pulling a transponder from her belt. She adjusted the signal to mimic a distress beacon. Mason's eyes widened. You're calling them. I'm baiting them, she said simply. The beacon pulsed. 10 minutes later, the sound of rotors thundered overhead. Contact, Mason hissed. A transport ship descended through the clouds, its spotlight sweeping across the clearing. Leia stood in the open, hands raised, motioning for her team to stay hidden. Mason grabbed her arm. Ma'am, what are you doing? She looked at him, calm, resolute, ending it. Alone. She gave a small, sad smile. Leadership doesn't always mean staying alive, Sergeant. Sometimes it means walking back into the fire so no one else has to. Before he could protest, she stepped out of the trees. The searchlight froze on her. The ship's ramp dropped. Armed soldiers poured out, shouting orders. Admiral Hayes, drop your weapon. She did, it clattered to the mud. They surrounded her, rifles raised, eyes wary, but beneath their discipline she saw confusion, fear. She wondered how many of them had seen her broadcast, how many had whispered her name in secret, wondering if the rumors were true. By order of Fleet Command, one of them said, voice mechanical through his helmet, you are under arrest for treason, data sabotage, and unauthorized release of classified material. Leia raised her chin slightly. Then take me to the man who wrote those orders. The cell was cold, metallic, sterile, just like she remembered. The hum of recycled air filled the silence. She sat on the bench, wrists cuffed, head bowed slightly. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished floor, not the reflection of an admiral, but of someone stripped bare of everything but resolve. The door opened with a hiss. Rourke entered. He looked older now, hair thinner, eyes tired, but still carrying that same polished arrogance of a man who'd never been challenged. "Leia," he said, his tone smooth, almost fatherly, "you should have stayed quiet." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "You should have stayed honest." He smirked faintly. "You always did have a flair for defiance. It's why we promoted you, why I believed you could lead." "You promoted me to contain me," she said, "to keep me too high to question what was buried below." He walked closer, his boots echoing on the metal. "You think one broadcast changes anything? We'll scrub it. People forget. They always do." "Not this time," she said quietly. "Not when the soldiers you command have already started asking why the truth sounds more real than your orders." His jaw tightened. "You've started something you can't control." She stood slowly, the chains clinking against her wrists. Control was never the point. Accountability was. Rourke stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't understand the cost of truth. You think it's noble. It's chaos. The moment people stop believing their leaders, the entire command structure collapses." "Maybe it should," she said, "if it's built on lies." He studied her for a long moment. Then, almost pitying, he said, "You were my best officer. It's a shame you'll die thinking you changed anything." He turned to leave. "Erik Danner thought the same thing once," she said softly. "He stopped before you ordered him erased." For a brief second, Rourke's composure cracked, just a flicker, but it was enough. She smiled faintly. "That's the difference between us. You bury mistakes, I face them." He didn't reply. The door closed behind him. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time blurred inside that cell. Then footsteps, rapid, urgent. The door opened again, not Rourke this time. It was Rivera, his uniform tattered, eyes wild. "Ma'am, we're leaving." "What?" He grinned breathlessly. "Half the security detail just walked off their posts, said they won't arrest a woman who told the truth." Before she could process it, Mason appeared behind him holding a key card. "We've got a transport waiting." Leia blinked once. "How?" "The broadcast," Mason said. "It didn't just reach civilians, it reached bases, outposts. Half the fleet knows, they're questioning everything." She stared at them, two soldiers who should have abandoned her, standing there instead with defiance in their eyes. She exhaled slowly. "Then let's not waste their faith." They moved quickly through the corridors, alarms blaring, lights flashing red. Somewhere behind them, orders were being shouted. But for the first time, those orders sounded uncertain. When they reached the hangar, Rivera pointed. "Transport's there." Leia stopped briefly, looking back toward the command tower. "He'll come after us." Mason nodded. "Then we better make it count." As the ship lifted off, she looked out the viewport, the base shrinking below, the same base where it all began. Her voice was calm but heavy with something deeper: relief, sorrow, resolve. "He wanted silence. We gave him a storm." Rivera smiled faintly. "Where to now, Admiral?" She looked toward the horizon, where clouds broke into morning light. "Somewhere the truth still matters." For a long time, no one spoke. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Then Mason said quietly, "Ma'am, do you think people will believe it?" She watched the sun rise, golden, vast, unflinching. "Belief doesn't matter. Change starts the moment someone stops being afraid to speak." She leaned back, closing her eyes for just a second. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace. And somewhere below, across bases, across borders, across the very heart of the fleet she once served, soldiers were whispering her name, not in fear, not in mockery, but in respect. Leia Hayes, the admiral who refused to stay quiet. The leader who taught them that truth doesn't need permission to exist. Why was the galaxy suddenly whispering her name? Not from the halls of power this time, but from mess tents, supply convoys, ship decks drifting between worlds. Her name passed quietly, almost reverently, like a prayer whispered under breath. Admiral Hayes, the one who told the truth. Leia sat in the cockpit of a stolen dropship, staring at the void beyond the viewport. The stars hung still, indifferent and endless. Rivera dozed in the co-pilot seat, exhaustion etched into his young face. Mason sat behind them, weapon on his knees, eyes distant. None of them spoke much anymore. Silence had become their companion, heavier than guilt but lighter than lies. 3 weeks since the escape. 3 weeks since her broadcast shattered the wall command built. Every system, every base, every fleet division now questioned itself. Some officers swore allegiance to the old order, convinced she'd faked the evidence. Others, younger, disillusioned, began walking away. Some vanished, some resisted, and a few began to organize. Leia's transmission had done what decades of politics couldn't. It made soldiers remember they had a conscience. But conscience, she knew, came with blood. Rivera stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. "We'll reach the rendezvous in 10 minutes, ma'am." "Still calling me that," she murmured. He smiled faintly, force of habit. She didn't correct him, she never did. Outside, the black faded into gray as the ship descended through the clouds of a remote tundra world. Below, nestled between frozen ridges, small lights flickered, the camp of those who defected. The first gathering of what people were already calling the Silence Division. When the ship landed, Mason lowered the ramp. Cold wind swept inside, biting through their uniforms. Dozens of soldiers stood waiting, not in rank, not in formation, but together. Different patches, different units, even different nations, all drawn by one signal. As she stepped out, they fell quiet. Not the silence of fear, the silence of belief. A woman approached from the crowd, Colonel Amira Saul, once Rourke's logistics officer. Her face was hard, scarred by a recent battle. "Admiral," she said simply, saluting. Leia hesitated. "You left command." Amira nodded. "After your broadcast, my unit refused orders to suppress a civilian protest. Command called it insubordination. We called it conscience." Behind her, dozens of soldiers nodded. Leia's chest tightened. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't planned to lead a rebellion. She'd only wanted truth, not followers. But truth, once spoken, grew teeth. She took a breath. "I'm not here to lead an army," she said. "I'm not your banner." Amira's gaze didn't waver. "Then be our compass. We've lost too many who can tell right from obedience." The words hung there, heavy and sincere. Leia looked at the faces before her, tired, wounded, determined. She saw Erik's ghost among them, saw the mud-stained courtyard, the eyes that had once mocked her now mirrored in men and women seeking direction. "Compass," she repeated softly, "not commander." Amira nodded once. "That's enough." Night fell over the camp. Fires burned low, throwing amber light across the snow. Soldiers huddled in circles, telling fragments of their stories. Some spoke of deserters' guilt, others of the orders they could no longer obey. Leia sat apart near a ridge, the wind howling around her. Mason joined her, holding 2 cups of recycled coffee. He handed one over without a word. She took it, smiling faintly. "You think they know what they've started?" He shrugged. "Revolutions never know what they are until they end." She looked toward the horizon, distant flashes of light, faint tremors echoing across the night sky. "Fleets already mobilizing. They'll crush this before it grows." "Unless we move first," he said. She shook her head. "We're not fighting them with guns, that's their language." "Then what's ours?" "Patience," she said quietly, "and proof." She held up a small data chip, recovered from the wreckage of the bunker. One Erik must have hidden before the explosion. He left this behind. I think it's a secondary archive, maybe communications between Rourke and Command Council. Mason stared at it. If that's true, we can end this. Or die trying, she said. They sat in silence again. The fire crackled below, the wind carried faint murmurs of laughter, the sound of soldiers remembering what hope felt like. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe in it too. Morning came sharp and blue. The camp stirred early. Rivera worked on linking their comms to old relay satellites, while Amira coordinated incoming defectors. Word was spreading faster now. Bases on the outer colonies had gone dark, refusing command transmissions. But good news, Leia knew, always came with shadow. At midday, a drone crashed near the perimeter. Its black shell still smoking, its insignia unmistakable Fleet Command intelligence. Amira approached, jaw tight. Recon drone, it's not just tracking, it's broadcasting coordinates. They found us, Mason said grimly. Leia knelt beside the wreck, inspecting the still glowing core. Then they'll strike before dusk. Amira looked at her. We can hold them off for a few hours at best. After that, Leia said, standing, we scatter, take the evidence and disappear. Every outpost needs a seed of truth, not everyone in one place. Amira hesitated. And you? I'll stay. No, Mason snapped. We're not leaving you. She turned to him, calm as ever. You will if you want this to mean something. Rivera stepped forward, voice cracking. Ma'am. Enough, she said gently. You followed me this far, that's more loyalty than I deserve. Now follow what's right, spread the truth. Mason clenched his jaw, eyes glistening. You can't save them all. I'm not trying to, she said softly. I'm just trying to make sure they remember why we started. By dusk, the horizon burned with the glow of incoming ships. The camp erupted into motion, soldiers scattering, loading transports, burning anything that could trace them. Leia stood at the command post, an old comm tower half buried in snow. Mason lingered beside her, unwilling to leave. When this is over, he said quietly, what do you think they'll call us? She smiled faintly. Depends who wins. He laughed once, a dry, broken sound. Then his voice steadied. You know, when you first walked onto that base, I thought you were just another officer pretending to care. And now, she asked. He met her eyes. Now I know you were pretending not to. She looked away, blinking back something she wouldn't let fall. Go, Mason, get them out. He hesitated, then saluted, the kind of salute not born from rank, but from belief, and ran toward the transports. As the first missiles screamed overhead, Leia climbed the tower ladder, wind slicing at her face. She reached the top, the sky painted orange by explosions. Below, ships lifted off one by one, streaking away into the storm. She activated the transmitter Erik had died for, patched the final data chip, and keyed the uplink. The old antenna groaned, its signal stretching across the sky like a flare of defiance. Her voice trembled only once as she began speaking into the static. This is Admiral Leia Hayes. If you can hear me, the truth you feared has already left the shadows. The files of Iron Veil are out. You can silence me, but you cannot silence what has already spread. Soldiers of Fleet, remember who you serve. It was never command. It was each other. Another explosion tore through the ridge below. The tower shook, sparks raining around her. She kept talking. To those who still believe loyalty means obedience, ask yourself what you're protecting, power or people, because when power falls, people are all that remain. Her hand hovered over the send key. For Erik, for those who were buried in silence, for every soldier who ever picked up mud and learned what respect meant, this is for you. She pressed transmit. The antenna burst with light. The signal surged through the sky, riding on every frequency they couldn't block fast enough. Across stations, across satellites, across the farthest outposts, her voice broke through static and propaganda alike. Then the tower exploded. The blast lit the tundra like dawn. Hours later, Mason's transport landed on a desolate ridge 50 miles away. Snow whipped across the viewport. Rivera leaned forward, staring at the horizon. "Where's the tower?" Mason didn't answer. Only the faint orange glow still burned in the distance. Amira's voice crackled through the radio. "Signal confirmed. Transmission went planetary. It's out. Every base has it." Rivera swallowed hard. "And her?" "Static." Mason looked down, hands gripping the console. His voice, rough and low, finally broke the silence. "She knew." Weeks passed. Command denied everything. Then command fractured. Bases went silent, not from fear this time, but from refusal. Officers resigned. Soldiers defected. Fleet's proud emblem became a symbol of questions no one could answer. Rumors spread of a woman seen in the outer colonies, living quietly, no uniform, no title. Others swore she died in the explosion. Some said she was in hiding, guiding the movement from the shadows. No one knew. But everyone remembered. Months later, on a small farming moon, a group of children played near a muddy riverbank. One of them, a girl no older than 10, tripped and fell, splashing mud across her face. The others laughed until an older woman tending crops nearby looked up. She smiled faintly, lines of age and peace soft on her face. The girl froze mid-laugh. "Sorry, ma'am," she said. The woman shook her head. "Don't be, just remember." She knelt, scooping a handful of mud, letting it run between her fingers. "This earth carries stories, respect them." The children nodded, unsure why her voice sounded so heavy yet kind. When they ran off, she looked at her hands, the same hands that once held command codes, weapons, lives. Now they held nothing but soil, and somehow that was enough. The wind shifted. Far away, thunder rolled across the plains. Leia Hayes closed her eyes, whispering to the wind, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And somewhere, light years away, her signal still echoed, a ghost in every transmission, a whisper in every soldier's mind. Why do legends always start with silence? Because silence remembers what words forget. And long after the transmissions ended, long after the last fleet base fell quiet, silence was all that remained. It had been 5 years since the day Admiral Leia Hayes vanished. 5 years since the transmission that broke the chains of obedience and turned whispers into rebellion. 5 years since the fleet learned the truth about itself and tried to rebuild what it had destroyed. In the years that followed, the galaxy changed slowly, painfully, like a wounded soldier learning to walk again. The great banners of the old command were taken down. The stars that once shimmered beneath the emblem of fleet authority now reflected something humbler, a promise to remember. And yet, in the heart of it all, one question lingered. What happened to her? Some said she died in that tower, her final message burning across the sky. Others believed she lived, hidden among the outer colonies, teaching quietly, helping quietly, leading quietly as she always had. But truth, as always, was somewhere in between. The morning was quiet on the frontier moon of Pelion. Sunlight spilled across the fields, catching the slow sway of grain that shimmered like gold. The air smelled of soil and smoke, the kind of peace that only existed far from the politics of stars. A young officer stood at the edge of the field, adjusting the collar of his uniform. His name was Lieutenant Theo Vance, barely 24, too idealistic for his own good, and freshly assigned to the Restoration Corps, the new arm of what remained of the fleet. He had grown up hearing stories of the silent Admiral, the woman who spoke truth into a microphone while the world tried to erase her, the one who never raised her voice, yet changed everything. The stories said she died. But legends he'd learned don't die, they transform. His assignment was simple: deliver a message to an old woman who lived outside the farming colony, a civilian, once fleet personnel, now off record, a message marked classified EYES only. He followed the dirt path until he reached a small farmhouse nestled between hills. Chickens wandered near the fence, and a figure knelt in the garden, hands buried in soil. She didn't look up when he approached. "Excuse me," Theo said. "Are you Ms. L. Hayes?" The woman looked up, hair streaked silver, eyes calm and steady as stone. There was something familiar about that stillness, the kind that didn't belong to ordinary people. "Depends who's asking," she said softly. He handed her the envelope. "From Fleet Restoration Command. They said it's important." She took it, turning it over in her hands. Her fingers brushed the seal, recognizing the emblem, no longer the cold iron eagle of the old regime, but a simple circle of stars surrounding a single flame, the symbol of renewal. "Thank you," she said quietly. Theo hesitated, watching her. "Ma'am, were you really?" She smiled faintly. "What do they say I was?" He flushed. "The silent admiral, the one who broke the fleet," she interrupted gently, "or who saved it." He didn't answer. He wasn't sure which was true. She looked past him toward the horizon. "You're too young to remember what it was like before. Soldiers who followed orders they didn't understand. Leaders who valued silence more than truth. It wasn't bravery that changed that. It was conscience." He frowned. "And conscience cost you everything." Her smile was small but warm. "No, it gave me something better." She opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter printed on standard command paper. The header read, "Fleet Restoration Command, Directive 1." She read it silently, lips moving slightly. Then she folded it back and looked at the young officer. "Tell them I appreciate the gesture," she said. Theo blinked. "You're declining." "I'm not coming back," she said. "The fleet doesn't need me. It needs people like you, ones who still believe it can be more than orders." He hesitated. "They want to name a new training academy after you, the Hayes Institute of Ethical Command. They said it's symbolic." Her eyes softened. "Symbols don't fix people, Lieutenant. Actions do." He nodded, disappointed but respectful. "Understood, ma'am." She studied him a moment longer. "Tell me something, Lieutenant, when you enlisted, did they teach you why you fight?" He hesitated. "For duty, for unity." She smiled. "That's what they taught me too, until I learned that the real reason is simpler. We fight for each other. Everything else is politics." He looked down, thoughtful. "Is that what you'd tell the next generation of officers?" "No," she said quietly. "I'd show them." He didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. He saluted, not from regulation, but from respect. She returned it, a small, graceful motion. "Safe travels, Lieutenant." As he walked away, he looked back once. She was kneeling again, hands in the soil, humming softly to herself, as if the earth held every memory she ever needed. That evening, after he left, Leia sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the fields in fire and gold. She opened the letter again. "Admiral Hayes, in recognition of your service and sacrifice, the Fleet Restoration Command hereby extends formal reinstatement at honorary status. Your records have been declassified. Your name restored. You are not forgotten. Commander Amira Saul." Amira. She smiled softly at the name, the woman who once asked her to be a compass, not a commander. It seemed she had become both after all. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of rain. She looked out across the fields, rows of new recruits training under the open sky at a small outpost beyond the hills. She could hear their distant laughter. And she knew the fleet had changed. Not because of her rank, not because of the transmission, but because, somewhere in their hearts, the soldiers who once mocked, feared, or doubted her had learned the same lesson she tried to live by. That leadership was not power, it was presence. And truth was not a weapon, it was a mirror. A few months later, news spread quietly through the systems. The Hayes Institute was built anyway, not as a grand academy but as a modest training center in the Outer Rim. Its walls were simple. Its motto, carved in stone, read, "Respect isn't demanded. It's earned one act of grace at a time." Cadets from across the world came to study there. They learned tactics, yes, but also history, real history, the kind that hurt to remember but healed to know. And every year on the anniversary of the broadcast, they gathered in silence. No speeches, no anthems, just a minute of quiet reflection. They called it the Day of Dignity. One day, a young cadet asked her mentor, "Do you think she's still alive somewhere?" The mentor smiled. Maybe she's watching, or maybe she became part of the silence that taught us all how to listen. Because legends don't vanish. They dissolve into the fabric of what they changed. Far from any academy or base, under the wide blue sky of Pelion, Leia Hayes walked through her fields one last time before dusk. The horizon glowed soft and endless. She paused by the riverbank, the same muddy shore where the children once played, and crouched, letting her hand sink into the cool soil. It clung to her fingers, familiar and grounding. She smiled. "The same earth soldiers bled on," she whispered to herself. "The same earth that carries their weight." She closed her fist gently, feeling the mud's texture between her palms. The same lesson she had once taught with calm eyes and a steady voice. Her reflection shimmered in the river's surface, older, quieter, but still unbroken. She looked up at the sky, at the contrails of distant ships streaking toward the stars, and she whispered softly, as if Erik were still listening. "You were right," they remembered. And in that moment, she knew, not in ceremony, not in medals, not in records, but in truth, that her war was finally over. Not the kind fought with guns, but the kind fought inside the soul. The wind picked up, carrying her words across the plains. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky to gold. And for the first time since she had worn the Admiral's star, Leia Hayes allowed herself to breathe, not as a soldier, not as a leader, but simply as a human being who had done what was right when it mattered most. Somewhere far away, her old transmission replayed on a loop, archived, restored, and taught in every academy across the new fleet. Her voice steady, calm, eternal. To lead is not to command obedience. To lead is to hold silent until truth has a voice. And when it does, to listen. The stars blinked awake above her. The world turned. And the legend of the woman who once had mud thrown on her face and answered it with grace became not just a story, but a standard.